What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Tyler. You are watching Mom's Basement MMA, and I'm going to give you guys my final thoughts and predictions about UFC Fight Night, Dolidze versus Imamov. Let's get right into it. The very first fight of the night, Gorimbo versus Rodriguez, Temba Gorimbo. I don't have the odds in front of me, but as far as Tapology is concerned, 72% of people on Tapology are with Gorimbo, 28% for Rodriguez. This is a welterweight contest, and I'm bringing that up because Pete Rodriguez, after that JDM knockout, he did try to go to lightweight. He was supposed to fight Natan Levy. He's not able to make 156 pounds. Fight ends up getting scrapped. His first fight back at welterweight. Pete Rodriguez is too small to be a welterweight, and his attempt to move back down to 155 pounds, that tells you everything you really need to know about it. He knows he's too small. He knows that's a big disadvantage. The best case for Pete Rodriguez is he puts away Temba Gorimbo, he catches him early, and then gets back into Dana White's good graces and pleads for him to give him one more shot to try to make the lightweight limit. In terms of his longevity in 170 pounds, he has no future here, but he does have a possibility of getting a win over somebody like Temba Gorimbo. Gorimbo, I'll just say this. He does have some accolades to his name. He did compete in South Africa for a number of years. He was a South African MMA champion. He comes over to the USA. He fights in Fury FC, wins that fight by decision, fights AJ Fletcher, gets submitted. Not a good look there considering Fletcher's not with the promotion anymore, but he does get a win in his most recent outing. As far as how I see this matchup going between these two contenders, I think Gorimbo's got a pretty sizable grappling advantage over Pete Rodriguez. I think as long as he doesn't get caught with the punch, as long as he can avoid Pete Rodriguez early on in this fight, who's going to be going for that knockout, he should be okay. I am looking for Temba Gorimbo to employ a grappling-heavy game plan. It's probably going to be slow. It's probably going to be a little bit boring. But if he can get this fight down to the ground, I think he's going to have a distinct advantage there, and I think he's going to be able to find a submission victory in the second round. Moving on up the card, we go to the lightweight division where Charles Johnson will be going up against Azat Maxum. Charles Johnson plus 160 underdog. Maxum did not live up to expectations in that Tyson Nam fight. He struggled immensely in that Tyson Nam fight, and a lot of people thought Tyson Nam did enough to win that fight. I certainly am one of them. I thought Tyson Nam won that fight 2 rounds to 1, but in any event, he has a chance to get a more authoritative win where he'll be going up against Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson plus 160 underdog. He's got a 13-6 record. Been a tough stretch in the UFC lately, but he's been getting really difficult matchups too, by and large. For Charles Johnson, he's currently on a 3-fight losing streak, and you have to be thinking to yourself that it's do or die. If Charles Johnson can't figure out a way to get a win in this matchup, his days of being in the UFC are likely over. And I'm expecting Charles Johnson to come into this fight very desperate. I'm expecting him to maybe take a few more chances in this fight and to maybe not come out with as slow of a start as he has sometimes done in the past. As far as how these two look on the feet, Charles Johnson with the striking, I think, gives him a bit of an advantage over Azat Maxum. The one thing that Charles Johnson needs to do is he needs to use anti-grappling. He needs to keep this fight on the feet, and I think he needs to be the guy that pressures Maxum. You don't want Maxum to walk you back to the cage. You don't want him to get you in a clinch and then to get this fight down to the ground. That's not going to bode well for Charles Johnson, but I think Charles knows that. One of the things that isn't discussed enough about Johnson is his takedown defense. It's actually pretty good. I'm curious to see, can Azat Maxum take this fight down to the ground? Because if he can't, and if this fight is going to be forced to be fought on the feet over the course of a 15-minute duration, Charles Johnson could 100% outpoint Maxum. And at plus 160, I'm going to take a chance on Charles Johnson. I'm going to take a chance on a desperate Charles Johnson to try to save his job in the UFC. And at plus 160, those odds are looking pretty good to me. By the time this recording comes out, they may have even inflated in the plus 200 range. But sometimes when I look at picks, it's not who always has the prettier resume between the two fighters that ends up winning these fights. Charles Johnson is a dangerous striker. He's a veteran of the game. He's a former LFA flyweight champion. He's fought some of the toughest guys in his career. And the fact that people are counting him out, I think that's going to probably give him a bit of a mental boost. His back is against the wall. You're about to see a desperate man fight on February 3rd. And for all those reasons, I'm going to take a flyer on Charles Johnson. We'll see if I end up being right or not. But as it Maxum minus 190 based off of that Tyson Dam performance, I can't do that. If you like Maxum in this fight, that's fine. Pick him on Tapology, but I would not recommend betting him at minus 190. I think that's way too high. And we'll see what happens come fight night. Okay, guys, moving on up the card, we go to the women's strawweight division. Molly McCann will be going up against Diana Belbita. These two did square off against each other back in 2019 at 125 pounds, but neither of these women had a ton of success at 125 pounds. They both shift. They both moved down to 115 pounds. Both of these ladies are going to be desperate for a win. I don't think there's any sugarcoating it here. It's reasonable to assume that the loser of this bout is going to get axed. I have to think after that disaster against Juliana Stoliarenko for Molly McCann, I can't help but wonder if Next Gen cashed in a chit to get her this fight. And it's a punishment fight. This is 100% a punishment fight. You go from being the co-main event at the O2, setting the table for Tom Aspinall. You lose that fight in the very first round, and now you're fighting on the undercard for the prelims on a UFC Fight Night show in the apex of all places. That's punishment. That is Dana White. That is an indirect message from Dana White saying he's not happy with Molly McCann right now, and he wants to see her back in the win column. And she has an opportunity to do that when she goes up against Diana Belbita. I do not expect a much different Diana Belbita to show up on February 3rd compared to the gal that showed up in 2019. I just don't think she's a UFC caliber fighter. Her striking's pretty good. It's a lot crisper. It's more polished than Molly McCann, but she is no match for Molly McCann in the grappling department, in the wrestling department. I think if Molly McCann can close the distance and force Belbita to fight a fight that's very similar to how these two fought each other in 2019, she's going to win this fight authoritatively. I am banking that Molly McCann's going to figure out a way to get a ground and pound finish in this fight. I think this fight gets down to the ground, and Molly McCann, desperate to get back in the boss's good graces, is going to be very aggressive. I think she's going to hunt for that finish, and I do think she's going to get it against Diana Belbita. Diana, like I said before, she's a good striker. I just don't know I just don't know if she can be a mixed martial artist at that UFC level quite yet. So I'm looking for Molly McCann to get back into the win column. Minus 250 betting favorite. That's going to be a little too high for me. She has not, even with this being a favorable matchup, I just can't get behind Molly McCann at minus 250. So I'm going to go ahead and pass on that one. But I do predict that she'll end up on top come fight night. Okay, guys, we are moving on up the card. Markel Mederos going up against Landon Quinones. This is going to be a really interesting fight at the UFC lightweight division. In fact, I would go as far as to say it's a dark horse for fight of the night. Mederos, the minus 175 favorite, going up against Landon Quinones, the plus 150 underdog. Landon Quinones, let's talk about him a little bit. For a lot of people, if the first time you heard about Landon Quinones was on Tough, you probably have very tempered expectations of him. You probably don't think a whole lot of him. And I can understand why. The Jason Knight fight, that is a fight that he should have won. He lost inside the first minute of that fight. Not a very good look. He goes to Australia. He fights Nasrat Haqparast, and he comes up short in that fight. But it was a better performance from Quinones. He did prove, I feel, that he belongs at that UFC level. And for a person of Haqparast's caliber to not be able to just run roughshed over Landon Quinones, I think that tells you something about what kind of fighter he is. Landon Quinones is a pressure fighter. He's a southpaw, and he wants to stand and strike with you for 15 minutes. Don't expect a whole lot of level changes from Landon Quinones. He definitely can do that, but this is a guy that's more comfortable on the feet, and he's going to want to stand and trade over the course of a 15-minute fight. This guy's a knockout artist. That's what he wants to do. He does not fight to go to a decision. He fights for that finish every single time he goes out. You could say the exact same thing about his opponent, Markel Mederos. The minus 175 favorite. He's got an 8-1 record. The only time he's lost was back several years on the regional scene. He falls short in a split decision. But this guy, it's really hard to find faults in Markel Mederos' game. This guy has looked absolutely fantastic. And in that Dana White Contender Series fight, he ends up absolutely blasting his opponent with a flying knee. The one thing I like a lot about Markel Mederos is his confidence. In that fight on the Contender Series, he was going up against a Dagestani guy, and that's very intimidating. And the odds were heavily against him, but you would not know that watching his presence, watching his poise, watching his composure, walking into that cage. He knew he was going to win that fight. Even if nobody else believed in him, he believed in himself. And you were able to see him radiate that confidence. He looked amazing in that contest. And that was very impressive to me. It showed to me that despite being a really young guy, he's confident in his skills, he's confident in his abilities, and he's confident that he belongs in the UFC. As far as making a prediction for this fight, I do expect this fight to be contested primarily on the feet. I'm expecting these two are going to be more than happy to stand and trade with one another, and it's going to be really close. But for me, I think Markel Mederos is probably the right pick, and even at minus 175, that seems like a pretty good deal to me. Landon Quinones, I'm a big fan of this guy, and even if he does fall short, I hope he gets more opportunities in the UFC. It's tough. It's tough. Nasrat Hakparas. You get a fight in the UFC against somebody like that, and then you have to follow that up against another guy, a rising star in Markel Mederos. But hey, that's the name of the game with the UFC. You're going to take the tough fights. There are no easy fights in the UFC, and Landon Quinones can definitely be a testament to that. But we're going to go with Markel Mederos to get this fight. I don't think he puts away Landon Quinones, though. I do think it goes the full 15-minute distance, and I think a lot of people are going to be talking about this fight at the end of the night, and hopefully both of these guys get a fight of the night bonus. Okay, guys, we are going to move on to the featherweight division where Blake Bilder will be going up against the Korean Jang-Young Lee. Blake Bilder plus 110, Jang-Young Lee minus 125 favorite. Blake Bilder 8-1, Jang-Young Lee 10-1. These odds do make sense to me. For all intents and purposes, both these guys are coming into this fight coming off a loss. Blake Bilder, he definitely got outclassed by Kyle Nelson. That was definitely a surprise to me. And Jang-Young Lee, he gets a split decision win over his last opponent, but I disagreed with that. I thought his opponent beat him 2-1. But based off of my take on this fight, both of these guys are coming off a loss, but it doesn't matter how I have these fights scored. It depends on what the judges say. So we'll see if that is going to impact or otherwise influence Jang-Young Lee going into this fight. When I broke down this fight in greater detail, I discussed Blake Bilder's age at length in that video. Right now, he's 33 years old, and he'll be turning 34 later on this summer. And it makes me wonder, are we seeing the best version of Blake Bilder to date? He is a little bit of an older contender. I'm bringing that up because I wonder how the promotion views somebody like Blake Bilder. Does he have enough time for them to really push him? I don't think he does. I think he has maybe 2 years left at a really high level. And these are the types of fights I think Blake Bilder is going to get. I think he's the B-side fighter that they're going to trot out the young, hot prospects in front of, just because there's really just not a lot of time on Blake Bilder's side. But don't get it twisted. I mean, he's still very high level. He can still get the job done. We saw him win in Australia, and then, of course, he fell short in Canada. So that was the very first time Blake Bilder's ever lost a fight. And it makes you wonder, okay, well, if the very first time you lose the fights in the UFC and you've never lost before, how does that impact your performance going into that next fight? You're used to winning. You taste defeat for the first time. Does that change anything as far as Blake Bilder is concerned? And it very well could. The idea of Blake Bilder coming into this fight, coming off a loss as a betting underdog, probably eager to shake off some of the opinions from people like me who are maybe wondering kind of where his place is in the UFC. Maybe wondering, is this guy too old? Can he really make a run? When you get doubted for the very first time, sometimes that brings out the best in people. But that'll remain to be seen when he goes up against Jang-Young Lee. Blake Bilder, sometimes he's a slow starter. And in 3-round fights, that can come back and bite him. I would like to see a little bit more urgency from Blake Bilder. I know he's a counter puncher. I know he does his best work from the outside of the cage. But against somebody like Jang-Young Lee, he's the type of guy that is very big for this weight class. You're going to notice that when these two fight. If you pay attention to the trailers ahead of the fights, Blake Bilder is usually the one saying, don't take me down to the ground. You're going to regret it. And it's easy to understand why. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. He does have a history of getting some submissions on his resume, but I don't think that's going to deter Jang-Young Lee. I'm expecting him to want to take the fight there. It would seem to me that he is going to have an advantage over there. I do think that it's probably safe to say Blake Bilder probably has a bit of an advantage over Lee when it comes to striking exchanges off the feet. But I'm looking for Lee to get Blake Bilder in a clinch. I'm looking for him to try to find a way to get a takedown. I don't think he's going to finish Blake Bilder, though. Blake Bilder's never been finished before, and he's only lost one fight, and that was by decision against Nelson. I don't see Lee getting that done here. He might be able to get a submission victory, but let's not count on that. I'm going to say this one goes the 15-minute distance, and we're going to go with Lee by decision. We move on up the card where Viviane Araujo goes up against Natalia Silva. Araujo, the plus 220 underdog. Natalia Silva, the minus 270 favorite. And at first glance, that seems absolutely nuts that Silva would be favored by that much. But when you look at what it is that she's been able to do in the ring, you can understand why. She's a demoralizing person to have to fight against. She can outstrike you. She can hurt you. When you try to grapple with her, she will stuff your takedowns. And we saw that against Jasmine Jazz Davicius when these two fought. Jasmine Jazz Davicius really wanted to try to take this fight down to the ground. She wanted to make this a dirty, ugly fight. And Natalia Silva was not having that whatsoever. You look at Natalia Silva, you see that Taekwondo style come out pretty early and often. And what is the game plan against people like that, right? It's to clinch them. It's to get them down to the ground. But her anti-grappling and her takedown defense and her work in the clinch, framing off and being able to get Jasmine Jazz Davicius to fight the fight on her terms, that said a lot to me about where Natalia Silva is at this point in her career. And that was just the Jasmine Jazz Davicius fight. Of course, she has since gone on and she has looked absolutely fantastic. That Andrea Lee fight definitely comes to mind, where she just absolutely pieced up Andrea Lee and hurt her badly. You heard over the course of that fight, Andrea Lee's corner just begging her to go forward and start pressing Natalia Silva. And a gamer like Andrea Lee was just getting beat up in there. And you could tell after that first round, she did not want to be in there against Natalia Silva any longer than what she had to be. Surprisingly, that fight ended up going the distance, but I don't see that happening here against Araujo. Araujo was tough. She can do a little bit of everything really well. She is coming into this fight coming off of a very impressive performance against Jennifer Maia. I had her winning rounds 1 and 2 pretty decisively. The third round, I would obviously have to give to Jennifer Maia, but plus 220, you'd be looking at that and you would be very, very tempted to put some, to bet small on Araujo. I wouldn't blame you for doing that, but I do think Natalia Silva is the right pick for this one. I'm pretty confident that she's going to figure out a way to get it done. We have seen Araujo get rocked before, and Natalia Silva has that power where if she rocks you, she can 100% put this fight away. And I'm expecting her to do that. I'm taking Natalia Silva to find a second-round knockout against Viviane Araujo. And this is going to be something that I'm going to have on my parlay. I'm pretty confident. This is one of the fights that I'm more confident in. Natalia Silva, probably not worth betting at just a straight minus 270. I think you're going to need to look at your prop options come fight night, and you may want to consider adding her on a parlay. But I'm pretty confident that Natalia Silva is going to be the right side for this one, and I'm going to be looking for her to get it done on February 3rd. We move on up a card to the heavyweight division, where the former LFA champion Thomas Peterson will be going up against Jamal Pouges. Peterson minus 200, the comeback on Pouges plus 175. When I look at these two stylistically, they're very, very different. Jamal Pouges, obviously, he's a very big man, and he's a striker. And he has got an impressive gas tank, I would say, for somebody of that size. Jamal Pouges can last the 15-minute duration without any problems whatsoever. I don't have concerns about his cardio at all. If you let him, he will pressure you, and he will be content to strike with you for a full 15 minutes. And you could expect Thomas Peterson to be acutely aware of the striking threat that Jamal Pouges poses. As far as what to look for in this matchup, Peterson comes from a pretty heavy wrestling background, and you could expect him to want to wrestle Pouges down to the ground. If Thomas Peterson can get this fight down to the ground, Pouges is not going to have any answer for him. Thomas Peterson, he does his best work when he's doing a ground and pound, but he's also really adept at grappling as well. And he's shown a few different looks. Against Chandler Cole, he was able to get him to submit by a key lock submission. This guy will pass into side control without any problems. He is more than happy to rain down ground and pound damage. He has really good strikes from side control with his elbow as well. That's something to look for. And I'm curious to see what other submission threats could Peterson potentially have. I think of wrestlers, and I think of people who like to get who like to posture up and like to do ground and pound and then use that to set up submissions. We didn't see Peterson use ground and pound to set up the submission in that fight against Chandler Kovalev. He saw the key lock, he went for it, and it was just very unique. And it showed that his game has definitely evolved since his LFA days. So as far as this matchup is concerned with Peterson and Pouges, I think it's stylistically a very favorable matchup for Thomas Peterson. And this is one of those bouts like Natalia Silva, I'm more confident. This is one of those bouts that I'm more confident in. And Peterson and Silva are definitely going to be a part of a parlay on my part. But I'm expecting Thomas Peterson to get this done. I believe in my first breakdown video of this matchup, I said Peterson gets a ground and pound finish in the second round. The only thing I would change is maybe move this up to the first round. I think Thomas Peterson's going to figure out a way to get this fight to the ground relatively early, and I think it's going to be too much for Pouges. So my pick is going to be Thomas Peterson by first round TKO. Moving on up the card, we're in the welterweight division where Randy Brown will be going up against Muslim Salikhov. Randy Brown, the minus 250 betting favorite. The comeback on Muslim Salikhov will be plus 200. This is definitely something to keep an eye on. These lines are 100% are going to be different by the time this video is published. But as of right now, I'm really surprised that Randy Brown is clocked in at the minus 250 favorite. Let's go back to that Wellington Turman fight. That fight against Wellington Turman was very alarming to me, and he really put it to Randy Brown. In fact, if somebody were to tell me that they thought Wellington Turman won that fight, I'm not going to argue with you too much. You could certainly make a case for that. And the optics, that round 3 against Randy Brown, Wellington Turman really hurt Randy Brown. And if that were a 5-round fight, Randy Brown is 100% losing that fight. Wellington Turman, that loss against Randy Brown was 3 in a row, and he's no longer with the promotion. He's since gotten axed, but talk about horrible optics in that fight. With Randy Brown, he's got the prototypical size. He's huge, he's muscular, he's lengthy. If you were to build create a character on UFC 5, you'd want him to look like Randy Brown. But the problem is with his chin. His chin is definitely something to keep an eye on. I don't think he has the best chin, and he gets tired. And his fight IQ, sometimes he makes some really bizarre decisions, and it just makes me question, based off of the Randy Brown that I have seen, I cannot bet him at minus 250 here. I can't do that. Even against Muslim Salikhov, who is almost 40 years old, I still can't do it. For Randy Brown to win this fight against Salikhov, he just needs to get out of the first round. If he can get out of the first round, and when Salikhov gets tired, if he can grapple with him or just make him think a little bit about striking, Randy Brown could definitely win this fight. The problem is I just don't trust Randy Brown. And when I look at this, I see Muslim Salikhov at plus 200. I'm not putting that on my betting slip yet, but that's a fight that I'm going to keep an eye on, because Muslim Salikhov, he wants to stand and strike with you. That's what it is that he likes to do. Yes, he is almost 40 years old. That is a concern. Yes, his cardio is not great. There is a noticeable drop-off in Muslim Salikhov from rounds 1 to round 2. You will notice that as this fight progresses if it gets out of that first 5 minutes. But we've seen Randy Brown get tagged before on the feet. We've seen it multiple times. And Muslim Salikhov, he looks good in the very first round. There's a possibility he could put Randy Brown away in the very first round. And you would have to think, based off of how this fight's going to go, if you like Salikhov, you got to take that first round knockout. You have to prop bet that. That's the only way he's going to win. I don't see Muslim Salikhov winning this fight by decision. Randy Brown could. Randy Brown might even win this fight by submission. But something tells me that Salikhov is going to figure out a way against the odds to get this done. And maybe it's a protest pick against Randy Brown. Maybe I'm still pissed at him about the Wellington Turman fight. But I'm going to go with Muslim Salikhov. I'm going to take the dog here. This might open me up for ridicule, and that's okay. But fortune favors the bold. And I look at Muslim Salikhov. Right now, he's at plus 200. That's maybe not enough for me to bet that. But if this gets closer to like plus 225, plus 250, I will 100% bet small on Muslim Salikhov. As far as my pick goes, I picked Salikhov before. by knockout, and I'm going to pick him again by knockout. Again, I might turn into a meme for making this pick publicly, but Randy Brown, I just don't trust him, and I think you're absolutely crazy to bet Randy Brown at minus 250. Randy Brown might win, but don't bet him. We move on up the card. Gilbert Urbina will be going up against Charles Chuck Buffalo Radtke. Urbina, the minus 175 favorite. Radtke, the plus 150 underdog. Urbina, he did fight in the middleweight division previously, and he is going back down to 170 pounds. He fought Orion Kosi in his welterweight debut. He ends up putting him away with the front kicks. He ends up tagging Kosi with a front kick, and Kosi was done after he landed that. So it was an impressive performance in his return to welterweight for Urbina. Charles Radtke, he makes his UFC debut taking a short notice fight. He goes up against Blood Diamond in Australia. And this was a real sloppy fight. There was a lot of fouls, and Radtke just really wasn't able to get into a rhythm. Now, to his defense, there were eye gouges. There were multiple nut shots. It was a dirty, ugly fight, and that certainly had a factor. He just was never really able to establish a rhythm. Now, he ended up winning the fight. Yes, he did his job. But I would have liked to have seen more from Charles Radtke. And to me, I looked at this fight and I was thinking to myself, okay, CFFC welterweight champion, I've seen him put guys away before. And he's going to do that against Blood Diamond. So I prop bet Radtke. I went like second round knockout, and it ends up going the distance. And good for him for winning the fight. I think he left some on the table, though. And I'm expecting Radtke to maybe come out with maybe a little bit more sense of urgency against somebody like Gilbert Urbina, but it's a tough fight. This is a really tough fight for Radtke to take. Gilbert Urbina and Blood Diamond are not even in the same stratosphere as far as comparisons go. Gilbert Urbina is a big, big dude. And you're going to notice the big difference in physicality, in size, and strength. All of those go toward Gilbert. Gilbert's going to have advantages over Chuck Buffalo in that department. As far as my prediction on how I see this one shaping out, I think that physicality is just going to be too much for Radtke. Radtke is not the biggest welterweight. At 5'9", I don't like it when people that are under 5'10" fight at welterweight in the UFC. I don't like that. I think he's too small for 170 pounds in the welterweight division. I just simply think he gets bullied by Gilbert Urbina in this fight. I think that size and physicality is going to be an issue for him. And I'm going to say that Urbina figures out a way to get a knockout in round 2. It could be a TKO, probably a ground and pound finish, but I think Urbina is going to employ some grappling. I think he's going to be able to reverse Radtke in a position and figure out a finish either in a clinch or in a ground and pound exchange on the ground. But I'm going to go with Gilbert Urbina to get it done in round 2 by TKO. The middleweight division, we have Aliashab Khiezriev going up against Mahmoud Muradov. Khiezriev, the minus 180 betting favorite. Comeback on Muradov, plus 150. There are big question marks about both of these guys. And when you look at Muradov, you look at that previous knockout power that he had outside of the UFC, it just remains to be seen if he is ready for this level of competition, if he is going to be a long-term viable contender in the UFC. We don't know yet about Muradov. Muradov, as I mentioned, ton of KOs on his record, but his fights in the UFC have been against middling competition at best. To the best of my knowledge, Brian Barberena is the only guy that's still active in the UFC. Everyone else that Muradov has beat, they've washed out. He has 2 losses. He has one against Cal Braulio, which isn't really that big of a deal considering Braulio is the number 15 ranked middleweight contender. But he did lose against GM3, and at this point in GM3's career, that's not a loss you want to have on your record at this point. As far as Khiezriev's concerned, he looked fantastic on Contender Series, but keep in mind that was like at the height of the pandemic. After the pandemic, a spate of bout cancellations. He's pulled out. His opponents have pulled out. In the limited times that we've seen him compete, he's looked good. But he has some question marks about him. We still don't know, is this guy all that he's cracked up to be? Is he, the next guy that's going to make a serious run in this weight class? And the jury's still out on that one. We don't know. So you have two guys that are both in their 30s that have a ton of question marks about them. And that's kind of what makes this a fun fight in a way. One of these guys, I use this term somewhat loosely because Muradov plus 150, Khiezriev minus 180. I suppose you could only say if Muradov wins that Khiezriev would have gotten fraud checked. But I do think you can almost say that about Muradov as well. Look at his volume of work. Look at his resume. Look at how many fights he has. If he loses this fight against Alisab Khiezriev, who's a guy that a lot of people are somewhat excited about, what does that say about him? I think that shows you that he's probably not a very serious contender. And despite his impressive-looking resume, he's probably going to be relegated to fighting like the entry-level guys for the rest of the amount of his time in the UFC and probably not going to be a very serious contender. As far as predictions for this fight, a lot of unknowns. I would expect there to be a slow start from Alisab Khiezriev. Haven't seen him compete in almost a year. He might start off slow. Muradov very well could end up winning the very first round just because he's got the more activity. I don't expect ring rust to be a factor from Muradov's side, but it certainly could be for Khiezriev. Khiezriev is just better, though. I think Khiezriev figures out a way to make Mahmoud Muradov grapple, and I'm going to say that he might lose rounds 1 or 2, but in the third, he's going to figure out a way to get Muradov. I think he gets him down the ground in the third, and he ends up. I think he ends up getting a submission victory in round 3. So we're going to go with Khiezriev, and at minus 180, that's not too bad. I'd go ahead and I'll pull the trigger on that. I will add that to my betting slip because I'm going to expect that those odds are going to get worse. Minus 180, that's pretty decent value for this guy, and we'll see. We'll see if he's going to be able to deliver for us come fight night. But minus 180 for Khiezriev, that's the pick. That's what I'm going to be doing, and I think you should as well. Okay, guys, we're moving on up the card. Juliana Stoliarenko going up against Luana Carolina. Stoliarenko, the minus 120 betting favorite. The comeback on Carolina, plus 100. Stoliarenko 11-7-1. Carolina 9-4 record. Not really thrilled about this matchup, if I'm being quite honest. This is a flyweight contest between two journeyman fighters that are both in their 30s. And really their future in the UFC is being the blue corner for somebody like a Miranda Maverick, for example. To me, just kind of reading in between the lines here, blue corner on blue corner violence is not really something that I'm all that thrilled about. And to me, it seems like the UFC is trying to figure out which one they want to go with and who do they want to get rid of. With the women, you do have a little bit more of a longer leash if you don't live up to expectations. Stoliarenko, I stand behind what it is that I've said. I angered some people with that video I made about her, calling her one of the most predictable fighters in the UFC. But she is. The facts are the facts. Like, listen, guys, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to demean her in any way, shape, or form. But look at her fights and you tell me different. You tell me she's not a one-trick pony. You tell me she's not a one-dimensional fighter. And I'm sorry you feel that way, but the video evidence should suggest otherwise. From the very moment she sets foot in the cage, she's looking for an armbar. Her striking, everything that she does with that armbar in mind. And if you stop the armbar, you stop Julia Stoliarenko. She doesn't care about giving up position. She doesn't care about you getting the better of the striking exchanges. Everything that she does, her strikes, her clinch, her takedowns, it's all done to set up an armbar. And if you stop that, you can stop her. And that's what I see happening with Luana Carolina. Luana Carolina, she's 100% a blue corner fighter. I know that. But at some point, the clock's going to strike midnight. And at this UFC level, you just cannot be a one-trick pony like this. Like, that level of success, like armbarring every single one of your opponents is just not sustainable in the UFC level. It's not. You can get away with that in the regionals, but you're not going to get away with that forever in the UFC. Julia Stoliarenko, she could armbar Luana Carolina, and it would not surprise me. But she's going to be on borrowed time for the rest of her tenure in the UFC. She is on borrowed time. That armbar is just not going to be sustainable, and you're going to see that over reliance on that move kill her. And she has an 11-7 record, so from the onset, I mean, that is the definition of a journeyman fighter. So for her to be favored at minus 120 to me against a Luana Carolina, who's only been tapped out one time in her entire career, and that was by knee bar, for her to be favored by that much, I think that's absolutely crazy. I'm okay with betting on Stoliarenko as an underdog, but in no way, shape, or form should she ever be a favorite against anybody. I'm sorry. I can't do that. I'm not betting on this fight. I think both of these women are completely unreliable, and I think you're taking a giant risk in putting any action on one of these two. Minus 120, we can't get behind that. And even the comeback on Carolina, she's plus 100, but she very well could get armbarred. If I had to make a prediction on in terms of how I see this fight going down, we've seen Stoliarenko get caught before. We've seen her get finished before. And if she goes for a sloppy takedown, if she loses position trying to get that armbar, Carolina could 100% make her pay for that and 100% end up finishing a fight because Stoliarenko is just so glued into taking her arm. And that's what I'm going to predict for this fight. I'm going to predict that Luana Carolina is going to get a knockout or a TKO. I'll say third round. That's how I see it happening. But Stoliarenko, Carolina, listen, these are two blue corner fighters fighting each other. They're both not trustworthy. I don't advise betting on this fight. Okay, guys, we move on to the co-main event where Renato Moicano will be making his comeback fight against Drew Dober. Moicano, the minus 140 betting favorite, Drew Dober, plus 115. I love this fight. This is a fun fight. And I love this fight because it's in the Apex. That's what makes this fight even better, in my opinion. We all know what Drew Dober likes to do. He's the lightweight knockout king. And it really comes down to, how do you see this fight ending? Is Drew Dober going to realm Renato Moicano, or is Renato Moicano going to choke out Drew Dober? For me, when I look at this matchup, though, if I have to make a prediction on what I think is going to happen, I do think Renato Moicano is the right pick. I think his striking is actually really good. Renato Moicano, if he takes your back, the fight's over. His rear naked choke is absolutely fantastic. That's his money move. And that's what I think he's going to be looking for at some point over the course of this fight. But when I studied Renato Moicano, his striking really impresses me. And I know everyone's going to go back to that Khiezriev fight and say, like, well, Tyler, he got flatlined. That's probably not a great example, but we all know what Khiezriev can do. And Moicano, I thought, up until that point where he ended up getting caught, he was looking great on the feet against Dober. And that's the one thing that he needs to watch out for, because this fight could very well end up just like that one. Moicano could look great on the feet, and then Drew Dober could absolutely catch him, and that fight could end up just like the Khiezriev fight did. But I'm going to go ahead and make a calculated guess that Moicano is going to just figure out a way to get Drew Dober's back at some point, whether it be in a clinch off the cage, or whether these two end up grappling on the ground. I think Moicano is going to end the fight through a rear naked choke. I have a feeling that's what's going to happen. And so my pick for this fight, I'm going to take Renato Moicano by submission in the second round. From a gambling perspective, that's my pick. From a gambling perspective, you look at Drew Dober at plus money, plus 115 in the Apex of all places. That's a very favorable environment for him. A 25-foot cage, that has all the makings of an environment that would certainly favor Drew Dober. I'm picking Renato Moicano for the purposes of making my pick. But come fight night, I'm going to be paying very close attention to what a prop bet would be and what a Drew Dober knockout might give me. That's certainly conducive with this fight being in the Apex in a smaller cage, and that might be something to think about if you have any sort of gambling interest in this fight. But as I mentioned before, Renato Moicano, that'll be my pick. We're going to look for him to get it done in the second round. Okay, guys, we move on up to the main event where Roman Dolidze will be going up against Nasourdine Imamov. Dolidze, the plus 130 underdog. Imamov, the minus 160 betting favorite. Be sure to check out my video. I did put out a video about Roman Dolidze, and I kind of gave you guys my overall view, my holistic view on just kind of where I think Roman Dolidze is at this point in his career. I did get a few interesting messages about that. There are quite a few Roman Dolidze fans out there, it would seem. But in any event, that's just my unfiltered opinion on what I think about Roman Dolidze. Be sure to check out that video to hear more about that. As far as this matchup is concerned, for me, I have beef with this matchup. I don't like this matchup. I don't like it at all, actually. Dolidze should be punching down right now. So the fact that at face value, the idea of him fighting somebody like Nasourdine Imamov, that is fine. If you're looking at it from that Dolidze perspective, like, hey, you lost to Marvin Vettori. I don't know if I agree with that, but in any event, the statistics are what they are. The record is what it is. The judges said Roman Dolidze lost, so we'll go with that. He should have to punch down. On the other hand, the other side of the coin, what has Nasourdine Imamov done to warrant fighting the 8th-ranked middleweight contender at this point in time? What has he done? Okay, great. He went to decision with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland becomes a champion. Good for him. What else has he done? There's a no contest situation with Chris Curtis, and then the fight with Ikram falls through. And he still gets to fight the 8th-ranked guy? I'm not with that. I don't think he deserves to fight Roman Dolidze right now. And for me, Nasourdine Imamov should be punching down as well. He should have to defend his number against an unranked guy. That's easier said than done. You start looking at all the middleweight contenders. Everyone's booked out right now. That's difficult to schedule right now. But like ideally, if all these guys weren't already previously booked for other fights, in a perfect world, I would say, no, you're going to fight Ikram. That fight's going to happen. You run that in Saudi Arabia. Or if that can't be done, if that's too late, then you need to defend your position, and I'm going to make you fight RoboCop. You put a fight like that together, or you make him fight Petrosian, somebody like that. I just don't think he should be able to line hustle and potentially fight Roman Dolidze, especially with that Ikram fight not happening. I don't like that. And I do think that if you're Imamov, fighting Roman Dolidze, you would much rather do that compared to fighting Ikram. Ikram's a much more difficult fight, in my opinion. I don't care that Roman Dolidze is the 8th-ranked UFC middleweight contender right now. I don't care. Stylistically, Nasourdine Imamov has all the advantages going into a fight like this. Roman Dolidze has that 8th-ranked rating, and yet we've never seen him fight in a 25-minute fight before. Never seen it. We know what Roman Dolidze likes to do. We've seen it time and time again. We know that he's got power in his hands. We know that he can put people to sleep. We know he's really, really strong. And we know that grappling with Roman Dolidze is not something you want to do. His grappling must be respected. His wrestling must be respected. But we know in the striking department, he can be exposed. He can be had. And Nasourdine Imamov, his striking is something else. He's called the Russian sniper for a reason. And even though this is a smaller cage, I am expecting him to absolutely pick apart Roman Dolidze on the feet. I don't think Roman Dolidze is going to have any answer for Nasourdine Imamov at all on the feet. And then making matters even worse for Roman Dolidze is Nasourdine Imamov's takedown defense is excellent. He has a 72% takedown defense rate, and that's something to think about. The fact that this is a 25-minute fight, potentially, Nasourdine Imamov's takedown defense is really good, and he's excellent on the feet. He's an amazing striker. He's very accurate. And with the volume that he throws, I think he knocks out Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze is not a guy that has a reputation for getting knocked out, but I see that happening here. I see Roman Dolidze getting very frustrated and trying to put anything together against somebody like Nasourdine Imamov. And Roman Dolidze, like I said, if he's able to grapple, if he's able to wrestle, if he's able to take this fight down to the ground, he could win. I don't see it happening, though. Not against somebody like Imamov. He'll be ready. He'll be ready. And I'm thinking that Nasourdine Imamov, there have been questions, there have been concerns about his cardio. in the past, but he did go 25 minutes with Strickland. He lasted the full 25 minutes. And that assuaged some concerns that I had about him. But we don't know that about Roman Dolidze. And that's a big thing for me. He's in his mid-30s, and we still don't know if he can fight a 25-minute fight or not. You know, that remains to be seen. We'll see. We'll see if he'll make me eat my words or not. But I think Roman Dolidze is going to get tired. I think all of that. I think the volume of striking for Imamov is going to pay a toll. And I think you're going to see a desperate Roman Dolidze as this fight gets into the fourth round. You're going to see him desperate to make something happen. And I think he's going to get caught as a result. And I have Nasourdine Imamov getting a late round finish against Roman Dolidze. I'm going to say fourth round knockout. Nasourdine Imamov will get it done on February 3rd. Those are all my picks. Let's see how well we do come February 3rd, or let's see if I'm going to have to eat a bunch of humble pie on February 4th. But that's how I'm going to be betting this card. Let me know who you have in the comments section. If you have any of these fights picked differently than me, let me know which ones you think I got wrong and why you think I got them wrong. Tell me who your winners are, and I'd love to continue this conversation in the comments section. Thank you guys for being a part of the community. I hope you liked all of my coverage about Roman Dolidze and Nasourdine Imamov, and I look forward to putting out more stuff just like this for all of you. Thank you guys, and enjoy the fights.